Hello, everybody, and welcome back to R-Rated, where today we're going to be looking at episode 5 of... Indeed, we're looking today at Time and Again, the 5th episode, the second to last of Ms. Marvel. And right off the bat, this is a really interesting episode. It pairs very directly with the previous episode, Seeing Red. I'd commented twice now for both episode 3 and 4 and how I feel like the plot could do with some stretching out, that they could have used like an extra episode or two to kind of make this work. And it's interesting. I feel like episode 4 and 5 either could have been a longer episode together or could have like broken down right down the middle into... So basically, episode 3 should have been an episode and a half. The second half of that episode should probably have paired with the first half of episode 4, with the exception of the cliffhanger. The cliffhanger of like, Karachi, what? But like the first half of that where they're kind of, you know, settling in Karachi and they're kind of bonding and having those moments. The second half of that episode involving meeting the Red Daggers and the attack by the clandestines, and then getting sent back to I think it's Punjab in 1947. That would have been the first half of an episode that then would have been paired with the first half of this episode, which features, you know, essentially the 5 years between when Aisha got the bangle and when Hassan and Sana fled for Pakistan. The second half of this episode, it's all like is kind of an elongated coda, I guess you could say, for the past 2 episodes, and then in literally a final scene, you get kind of the lead in to the final episode. If anything, the final scene of this episode would have worked as a stinger. They very much could have done that as the stinger scene. There's no stinger. I think this the first time outside of What If where they haven't had a stinger for the second to last episode. Most of them have. Maybe not all of them, but it's been like, it makes sense. You have one kind of extra little oh as you're getting into the final episode. But yeah, no, the final scene feels more like a lead-in for the next episode than anything, but it also does have kind of a cliffhanger-y sort of deal there. So to get into it a little bit, this episode, like I mentioned before, is mostly split into 2 parts. The first half, we actually see primarily from the perspective of Aisha. We're seeing essentially, literally, looks like the same day that we saw her before, after she got the bangle, running from British soldiers, and then eventually finding herself in a village somewhere in India. We don't really know exactly where, I don't think. And she eventually, you know, when she's there, she sets her eyes on Hassan, who is already using a cane. He actually is using kind of an old like tree branch essentially to prop himself up. And he's speaking to the people about independence from the British. And, you know, talking about the words of Gandhi and all of that. And eventually the two, you know, she's very like, I want to say standoffish. She's distant, I guess you could say. She's cool and distant. Doesn't really see the necessity of, you know, connecting with anybody that's here. But Hassan, you know, endears himself to her a bit. Offers that if she needs somewhere to stay, then you know his home is a welcome place for her. And they start to speak and, you know, learn a little bit from each other. Her name, Aisha, is She Who Lives, which is interesting considering, you know, my assumption based off of how Najma hasn't aged in 80 years would be that if Aisha was around, she would also be presumably the same age as she was before. But we get to see kind of this sort of montage. It's not done as a montage, like a musical montage, but we get a collection of short snippety scenes of, you know, her giving him a cane and thanking him for giving her, like, making this her home. And we find out that she's pregnant. And we get another scene where they have a young child. And we learn that that's Sana. And then we get a third scene where Sana looks to be around like 3 or 4, somewhere around there, and is like playing with the bangle a little bit, which Aisha has kept on her person this entire time. And we learn during the same time that Hassan is still, struggling with what's going on in India. We don't know exactly when this is, but it's at least after the division into the Dominion of Pakistan, the Dominion of India, and mass migration is occurring. This episode, for what it's worth, in the very beginning, we have a little film strip segment kind of talking about partition, and they don't really, they don't get into huge details, but they don't entirely shy away from the fact that, people were murdered on these trains. There was a lot of violence back and forth during the mass migration on the trains, in villages, everywhere. This was a, awful, horrible thing. And similarly, Hassan is trying to figure out whether, what to do about what's going on, because he's Muslim, and India is becoming increasingly hostile towards Muslims. And, he is angry, understandably so. There's I don't know if I wrote down his name. There's a man from the village who brings them milk and vegetables because Aisha is not. They won't sell her anything because of who her husband is, and you get kind of this very deep stress, and I wouldn't call it dread, but it's just this sort of tension, I guess. That's just kind of bubbling under the surface for him, and understandably so. It's a very rapid set of scenes in the sense that we get, Sana as an infant is just such a quick little scene, and then we get her at 3-ish, and we get the radio, and we get the explanation, and that scene actually plays out. We get some more that happens afterwards, but we kind of jump from 1942 to 1947 over the course of about maybe 2 minutes. It's really quick. Not like we needed to see more per se, but those incremental steps. I mean, and even as I'm saying it, I'm not sure how critical I can be about it, because the important parts of that are, we get a quick establishing, bit that they're expecting a child, and then we have a quick establishing bit that the child is born, and then we jump ahead to the night before they decide to leave, where Aisha outside the door sees Najma standing in the field. She goes to speak to her, and Najma is already kind of off-putting and a little hostile, and is essentially all right, where's the bangle? It's time for us to go home. And Aisha isn't really interested. She's just well, she doesn't really fight back much. She's kind of trying to appease Najma. But Aisha's found a family. She's not really interested in leaving or going anywhere. And so she basically says oh, well, I hid the bangle. I'll need some time to find it. Essentially trying to buy her some time to get away or to figure out a new plan. And Najma says, you have until sundown tomorrow. So we kind of get this. It's made very clear that Najma is kind of cold and aggressive, I guess you could say. She has the plan and she won't back down from it, and we kind of get a mirror of that later on. And I guess we'll come back to that, but essentially we this is the point where Aisha decides, all right, we have to get out of here. Even though she had just previously been, supportive of the idea that yep, this is our home. We're going to figure it out. We're going to get through this. It's going to be fine. Now she's we got to pack our shit and go. And on the way there, she keeps insisting to Hassan, we need to get Sana onto the train. You need to get Sana onto the train no matter what happens. And he's like, what the fuck is going on? So she shows him the bangle and essentially enchants it a little bit. And it's unclear how much of this was already there, how much of this she had already done sometime recently prior to this, or if this was her adding it herself. But the bangle is pretty small, and it expands to about double the size, and you can see a bunch of markings and things kind of appearing on it, including the inscription that it now reads in the present, which is, what you seek is seeking you. which turns out is actually a line from a 13th century Persian poet named Rumi. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. And that's a cool, like, reincorporation of that, I think. So she does this thing, and Hassan is like, why are you telling me this now? Not in the sense of like, this is crazy. Why are you doing this right now? It's more like, why did you wait so long? And it's kind of made clear that he always knew that something was up with Aisha, and she always knew that he kind of knew something was up. So it's kind of this unspoken thing for a while. And, she basically is like, something may happen. You need to get Sana onto this train. And eventually she like makes him take Sana and separates. And she quickly runs into Najma. Najma stabs her. And as she is bleeding out next to these trains, she looks at the picture of her and Hassan and Sana and says, what you seek is seeking you. And the bangle does a thing. And at first you're like, oh, the bangle is about to do the starlight and this is all happening and Kamala is going to see this. And it's like, no, this opens a rift and Kamala falls into 1947. So like this was a connecting point, which also slightly begs the question to me of like whether like, is the bangle actually in those other instances looking across time or not? It's magic. It doesn't super matter, but it's one of those like, what is that all about? But that's what brings Kamala here. And it's kind of interesting that like, I'm wondering if the reincorporation they're going with for the quote of what you seek is seeking you is meant to be at the very least, like, so directed at Kamala, what you seek, which is Aisha, is seeking you. Like Aisha needs you right now. Because when she shows up, she's like, you need to find, she thinks that Kamala is Sana from the future. Or just a grown-up Sana in general. And she's like, I'm not Sana. And she's like, she needs you. She needs you. Find Sana. She sends her to do this. I guess you could also say that it goes the other way to Aisha is like what you seek. Someone who can save Sana is also seeking you. She's trying to figure out more about Aisha. So it's a nice kind of like, it's a nice way to do that where it's like, yeah, these 2 points need to come together. It's a really cool, kind of element in all this. I mean, we had episode 3 was called Destined and it kind of, wove a bunch of these things together and all of that. And we get this really cool scene where essentially Kamala finds Sana. Sana's standing by herself. She gets separated from Hassan while he's trying to find a door onto a train that isn't completely stuffed with people. And Kamala essentially tries to use her powers to create some like lit up platforms of hard light for Sana to kind of jump across that will lead her to Hassan. I don't know if it's literally that the platforms she's creating are going to, by their own nature, find him, or if it's just that she can hear Hassan, but she can't get through the crowd. So by doing this, like people can't like walk into these like crystallized platforms that are hovering off the ground or what. But so Sana jumps on, she jumps onto another, and then the crowd is moving so quickly that Kamala gets knocked over and the platform falls and shatters. But rather than go away, Sana, who was given the bangle earlier, and I think it was put on her forearm earlier on, she is able to, she might even have it on during the scene now that I'm thinking about it. I think she does. So Kamala has her bangle and Sana has one too, and she's doing one of the Professor X style, like she is holding up these fragments, and it's such a cool little moment because like you have, so Kamala's freaking out because she's like, no, you need to figure it out. There's supposed to be stars. Aisha, you're supposed to be the one that does the starlight to get her back, and she dies, and she's like, oh God. And then we have Kamala there is like, okay, I can't do stars, but I can do circles, and that's the platforms. And then you have the moment of Kamala holding it up, and these little bits of crystals are like glimmering and glinting and glistening like starlight, and they kind of walk directly to Hassan, and it's like, oh, that's pretty cool. That's a nice way to like make all of that sort of work, and it works as like this figurative kind of thing too, of like, oh, starlight. And it's like you can see how they can arrive at that kind of description. And you just have this moment of Kamala standing up. She's like, oh God, like not so much in just shock. Obviously there's shock, but very emotionally too. She's been trying to find and connect somehow with her great grandmother and just watched her die, and now she's saving her, infant grandmother from, and she just kind of like is this emotional little ball. She's like, it was me. Oh God, it was me, kind of thing. Like, oh, I did this. Hassan grabs Sana. They hop on the train, and I really do. I thought it was a really neatly laid out little causal loop. I think one, because, and maybe this is just me, sometimes I just miss this stuff on the way in. It wasn't immediately obvious how this was going to resolve. I wasn't really sure. I was more expecting Kamala to witness this stuff, partly as a vision, but no, the Bengal just pulled her back in time. She straight up went back in time 75 years. Or more, I think it's like 77 years. But the way that they wrap that up, and the way that they, close the loop, essentially, because a lot of times you'll do these closed loop things and either they fuck it up in a way where it's like, well, that doesn't make sense, because then if that didn't happen, then that didn't happen. This is one that works. Like, it's one that never had a beginning, but it's also transdimensional magic. So I think we can give it a pass for a loop that never starts. And also, they don't fall into the trap of having one magical implement. They don't do the Sonic 06 Chaos Emerald thing where there's one thing that's just stuck in a loop forever. The two Bengals never really interact as far as we're aware. Nothing is exchanged. She shows up, she helps it happen, and she goes back. So she always was the reason that happened. And like, yes, it's a situation that never had a beginning. Unless, who knows, the first time around, maybe Sana just barely found her way back because of blah, 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 or something. But it doesn't matter. In this case, it just works. It's neat. It's just surprising enough the way that they pull it off that, like, you go, oh, okay, interesting. They throw, like, little twists in there to make it work. And I think that was really nicely done. I definitely got a little bit choked up when Aisha died. I think just like because we spent half this episode learning about her and learning about how invested she is in like her family and over her people from the Noor dimension, and like how she will sacrifice herself to keep them safe and make sure that they live on. And Kamala showing up, who's been emotional too, of like trying to find more information about her and then coming to watch her die, just this kind of quiet moment. And when Kamala's like, no, you need to help. This is you're supposed to do this. And Aisha just kind of quietly with her last breath is like, Sana will be fine because you're here now. And it's like, that was like, that got me more than I was expecting it to. And I was like, okay, all right, I'm in it now. So this is all like the first maybe 55 to 60% of the episode is essentially this 1942 to 47 chunk, and it pairs really well with the second half of the last episode, which had the red daggers and all of this thing, because when we come back from this, essentially after Sana and Hassan get on the train, Kamala just kind of and the rift kind of pops open and she goes back, and in that little marketplace everybody's been knocked out, and they look and there's a rift opening. The veil has begun to open, and it's spewing out this like wispy kind of energy everywhere. And I think at this point, only Najma and one of her associates are still alive. I think the guys have all been killed at this point. But the other one goes up and is like, we get to go home. All right, we get to go home. And she reaches out to the rift, and you see these little tendrily things of light reach out and immediately turns her to dark crystal, and she crumbles. And I'm like, oh, that's not good. And now tons more energy is ripping out of this thing, and people are running, and Kamala's trying to block, the energy so people can escape. And she's begging Najma. And again, this is one that like it got me way more than I thought it would. She's begging Najma to help her to stop it. And Najma basically says that she won't. And then she like yells at her that like she took away Aisha's family, like don't do it again, Kamran needs you, like, and she's like, oh no, I left him behind already. And like, so you're just going to do it again, you're just going to ruin his life just like you ruined my family and all of that. And she's like, you're right, there's only one way. And she walks up to this rift and she just whispers Kamran as she also turns to Dark Crystal in a really bad looking CGI effect. It's among the worst ones. Tomorrow I'll talk about one that's actually worse than that. Not in Ms. Marvel, but the Dark Crystal effect looks very bad up close, like oof. And this series has been pretty good with the CGI. The crystal bit is like the first noticeably not good looking CGI. Everything else has been pretty solid. I think the only other one that was weird was when Kamala was first trying out her powers and she kind of like skids around on a platform and then does a little like yes thing and she looks a little too animated and rubbery. But yeah, so Najma's gone, and as she whispers that, a little wisp of teal energy finds its way to Kamran, and he's got the hard light kind of hand going on. And this winds up wrapping into that little stinger where he finds Bruno and the DODC finds him. Turns out, by the way, that he legitimately thought that Bruno's name was Brian, and he does feel like shit about it. It is nice to see that he is legitimately apologetic about that. Bruno is obviously still kind of like a little grumpy and salty and stuff, but he's trying to play it cool. He's trying to help him because he's essentially trying to stay hidden from the DODC. The DODC shows up. He fires out a thing and hits it, and a missile flies in a circle Q and blows it up. But I think the more important part of this ending, like again, that should have been a stinger, I think. The more important part of this closing, like 40%, 30% of this episode is just this extended coda, like I mentioned before, of Muniba and Sana find out where Kamala is using like the Find My Phone app, essentially. They both see her using her hard light powers. So she kind of comes clean about all of that. They go back to Sana's, home, and they look at old photo albums of Muniba, who it turns out actually did have a rebellious teenage phase. It wasn't just like the inversion of the previous one. So forget about what I said last time. You get to see some concert tickets. She went to see Queen. She went to see Springsteen. She used to, there's a name for it when you follow around a touring band, and I cannot remember it to save my life. Nope, doesn't matter. But she followed Bon Jovi around when she was 17. And that turned out, I think, to be how she met Kamala's father. I think they said that in like episode 2, that Bon Jovi is the reason that they met in the first place. So it's nice to see that, like, yeah, no, she's not like completely unlike her mother and her daughter. And she did have kind of a rebellious phase, and they all have like this really meaningful kind of closure with their relationships, where Muniba kind of apologizes for holding on too tight, saying that she's not really ready to let her go. And then Sana saying essentially like, I didn't hold on tight enough. As soon as you decided you wanted to rebel, I just let it happen, and I shouldn't have done that. And I had to wait for so long to see you again. And Muniba also kind of apologizes, being like, yeah, but I didn't really try the way that I should have. And it's like, it's a really good like reconciliation scene for all of them. And like I said before, episode 4 and episode 5 together are a really nice block of show. It's about an hour and 15-ish minutes when you take out the credits, and maybe it's a little less than that, actually, but I really liked it. I think that they are probably, it's interesting, I didn't rank them the highest, but I think that they're probably the most cohesive pair of episodes so far. And for that I'm going to give this episode an 8. I think this is a better episode than the last. I think that there were some really good emotional moments. I think that some of the visual effects weirdly dropped the ball very hard. And the extended coda at the end would have been like if they made a feature-length episode or a movie that was basically just this and the last episode together, and like massaged out some of the details a little more. That'd be a great feature-length thing. Splitting it in 2 made it a little bit trickier, and it literally is like a good 15 minutes of like reconciliation and stuff, and like a really drawn out kind of finale there. I say finale, it's not the finale. There is another episode that comes out after this. I did see the name for it already, so I can't do my usual prediction. I usually like to predict what the final episode is going to be called. But before we can get to that, I am going to check out Thor, Love, and Thunder. I say check out. I've already seen it. I'm going to talk about it. And then we're going to come back around to the finale from Ms. Marvel. Yeah, again, so far I'm really enjoying. Oh, I did have one comment. One thought that I wrote down during the thing when Cameron gets his powers is, oh God, it's another mirror match. They seem to be leading into this thing where Cameron's going to essentially be fighting Kamala with similar powers, which has been a major thorn in the MCU side and just kind of comics in general. There's a lot of like comic characters that essentially the bad guy's just an evil them. The MCU's had a real problem with it. Like 40 to 50% of their movies and TV shows involve mirror matches of some kind. But yeah, so I like I said before, I really like this episode, especially paired with the last one. If I were to rank the two episodes together, I'd probably give them an 8 or even a 9, just because of the way that they kind of like blend into each other. But yeah, I'm going to give this one an 8, and I'm really looking forward to the final episode of the season. I don't know if there will be a season 2. I know there's going to be The Marvels as a film follow-up to this, along with Captain Marvel. And probably, I'm curious how it may relate to like Secret Invasion, or I don't know if there's any other like galactic scale stuff that would be big for that. I'm very curious to see how Captain Marvel and Ms. Marvel will interact in The Marvels. I don't really know anything about what the plot of that movie is going to be, and I don't really know how the two of them would interact, really. I feel like Rambo and Kamala would work together really well, just like the way that their powers kind of do stuff. But Captain Marvel is basically like all the powers, all of the like strengthy energy powers, all mashed together, and she can fly. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. I'm curious to see what they pull out for the final episode for Kamala's powers too. But if you liked the episode, feel free to talk about it in the comment below. If you didn't like the episode, talk about it down there too. Same goes for this video. If there's stuff you liked, stuff you didn't, let me know. This thing is always changing, and I'm trying to not have major review pileups like this down the line. It was a tricky summer. So, but yeah, thank you guys very much for watching. I'm looking forward to the finale, and I'll catch you next time for Thor, Love, and Thunder. And then we will do the finale of this show. So have a good one. I'll see you later. Bye.